Alright, so there are all these announcements right now. I'm at the airport in San Francisco on my way to Japan for a few weeks, and I thought I'd talk about this little thing that I realized on my flight from LA to here. I actually passed out for the whole flight, and then I woke up and I had this epiphany, so I just want to talk about that for a second. Alright, so if these announcements will allow me or not, whatever, let's go. So, did you ever have it as a kid where, you have a teacher and in your mind, your teacher's full-time thing in life, not just job, but her full-time thing is just to be a teacher. And, as kids, we have limited perspective, so you have the impression that that teacher doesn't have a life outside of being a teacher, and it would never occur to you that perhaps on a Friday night that teacher would go out with her friends and get drunk. Maybe she hangs out with her parents, she hangs out with her kids maybe, and she actually has this whole thing going on behind being a teacher. Maybe sometimes she goes home and she complains about her students. She thinks about you, and it would never occur to you. I don't know if you ever had that. For me, I definitely had that as a kid. It just never occurred to me that all these teachers actually had a life outside being a teacher. It's kind of funny. And before coming to the airport, I was hanging out with a friend of mine, and she's a flight attendant. And I was joking about how, it's interesting because I had that about teachers when I was a kid, but I realized that even growing up, I kind of had that about flight attendants as well. And, you meet flight attendants generally in one setting, which is when you're boarding a plane. And that being the case, they have to act in a certain way, and they always act in a very polite way. And you're kind of like, okay, they're flight attendants, and it's kind of like their job. And so, this is important because, to me at least, this kind of shaped the way that I treated flight attendants, so to speak. I told my friend that, it's kind of funny that before I met her and I hung out with her, I kind of saw flight attendants the same way that I saw teachers when I was a kid, because in my mind I was like, okay, they're just flight attendants, that's just the thing that they do. And so that being the case, I never thought about the fact that when I'm talking to them, and I'm in a plane and I'm asking for something, that person is a person who actually has a lot of things going in their lives, is a person who might go home and, hang out with their friends. And how crazy is that, right? A flight attendant hanging out with friends, and they might swear, and they might be angry about something, or perhaps they have something going on in their lives. This kind of really hit me because a couple of days ago when I was hanging out with my flight attendant friend, she was having something going on in her life that was a very personal thing. I'm not going to talk about it, but something really bad, so to speak, something really sad happened in her life. And that being the case, she still had to go and fly. And I was like, whoa, all these people who are going to be on that flight are going to interact with her and might not see that she has something going on in her life that's something that's really sad. They might not see that she's a person who comes home and then she hangs out with me, and then we go and have fun and we talk in ways that they would never imagine her to talk, right? And but it's not a bad thing at all. It's just that she is a person in the same way that every flight attendant is a person. And I actually noticed as I was getting off the plane here in LA, that I even though I passed out through the entire flight, so I didn't really get to talk to any of the flight attendants during the flight, but when I got off, I looked at each and every one of the flight attendants and I thanked them more sincerely than I've ever thanked a flight attendant in my life, because I saw them as individuals. And this is the topic of this whole video. In the same way that teachers are individuals that have a life outside being a teacher, that have a life outside the context in which you meet them, flight attendants also have a life outside of that. Now, when I say this, it might seem really obvious, but really consider this and really consider your experience in the past with not just flight attendants, but just with people that you meet in a certain context, and how, as human beings, we're not the smartest. We like to think that we're smart, but in a lot of ways we're stupid, right? Because for me, it took 22 years of my life and meeting a flight attendant and hanging out with her for a whole month to really realize that these people have lives. And so that changed, how I treat them. When I walked off the plane, I was like, thank you so much. And I was like, whoa, these people are actual fucking people who have a life outside this whole flight attendant thing. This is crazy, right? Now, let me give you another example. I read in a book recently that apparently people who, the weather report people, the people who report the weather on the news, it's very common that they either get liked or hated based on the type of weather that's in that area. So apparently it's very common that if someone is broadcasting bad weather over and over and over again, they'll get things like hate mail. They'll get things like people calling them with death threats. I mean, how crazy is that? Because people associate them with that bad news, so to speak. On the flip side, when weather report people report good weather over and over again, people love them, and people go up to them, maybe in the streets, in the cafe, and be like, yo, I love you, you're awesome. And they associate that with the reporting with them, right? Apparently in ancient times, it would be very common that if a messenger came back, like during times of war, if a messenger came back to report a victory or some good news, they would be celebrated. The actual messenger would be celebrated, while on the flip side, if they came and reported something that was tragic, then all of a sudden they wouldn't be celebrated, but they would actually be killed. The messenger would be killed when it has nothing to do with the messenger, but it has to do with the actual message. How crazy is that, right? Now, you might be listening to this right now and being like, that is insane. And you might think to yourself, I would never hate the weather report person for reporting bad weather. That's insane, right? And yeah, that might be like, that's what I thought too, but when I caught myself actually recently, I was in a supermarket and I was buying whatever the fuck I was buying. I don't really know what I was buying. And I was at checkout, and at checkout, I was going through self-checkout, and I was doing my thing, and the thing wasn't working. And when the thing doesn't work in a self-checkout thing, it says help is on the way. Someone is going to come and help you out. And I was just waiting there, and it was like the 5th time this happened, and I was just waiting and waiting and waiting, and no one came. And I was like, oh, God, like, I was getting really mad because my roommate was waiting for me. He had gone through not self-checkout at that time. Anyways, a lot of drama was going on in my head and stuff like that, right? And I was like, this is stupid. And what I realized was that as the person was walking up to help me, I was becoming really grumpy, and I was becoming really angry, and I started to, I didn't start to hate on that person, but I started to transfer the anger onto that person. And at first, my initial reaction was they came over, no smile, no greeting, no nothing, just my arms crossed, and I was just waiting for them to get their job done, because I was like, yo, like, can this person please fix this? And as I did that, I remembered the story that I read in the book, and I was like, whoa, wait a second, I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm transferring my anger onto this person when this whole situation has nothing to do with them. Like, they're just doing their job. They're just there and helping me, and they're trying to get through their day. They probably have a lot of things that are going on in their lives as well, but in that moment, with my limited perspective and with my inherent human biases, I instinctively saw that person as a person who is not an individual. I completely disregarded that for a second, just because, you know, I mean, it doesn't mean that I'm a bad person, but we have to understand that that is how we are as human beings, that we have very limited perspective, and when we meet someone in a particular context, it might drive us to see that person not as an individual, but as just as that thing that the context calls for, right? So for example, when you're a kid, you look at a teacher, and for you, that person is just a teacher. That's all they are. When you grow up, maybe flight attendants, they're just flight attendants. And by the way, that's also why, you know, for example, like, because my flight attendants will talk about their passengers all the time, right? So for example, like, imagine like I'm on a flight, and like the flight attendants are offering drinks, and I'm like, oh, can I have this please and this please? And I ask in a certain way, like, that I'm like, oh yeah, but you're just a flight attendant, like, you have to give me this, it's your job, right? I might like treat them that way, but that's not the nicest way. Like, you know, that kind of disregards that they're people. Like, yeah, it's their job, but they're also people. And the same way in that grocery store, that person who came to help me out was an individual, and that is something that, again, I completely disregarded. Now, what is something else that's in a supermarket that is also an individual that we might sometimes disregard? Well, think about a chicken. Think about, for example, when you go to KFC, actually. I used to love KFC. I used to like organize lunches at KFC with my friends. It was my shit. I fucking loved it. Okay, so think about that for a second. When we go to KFC, we order a bucket of chicken, right? And we eat the chicken. Now, what's really interesting is that in that moment, we're not thinking much deeper than, you know, hey, this chicken kind of tastes nice. I kind of enjoy it. It's kind of a fun time, right? That's as deeply as you're thinking about it. But what's really interesting, like again, I said, that limited perspective that human beings have, we're not thinking about where that chicken comes from. We're not thinking about, hey, wait a second. This piece of chicken that's in my hand right now is actually the body of a chicken that once had a life. And in fact, in a very similar way to you and I have a personality, you and I have our own uniqueness. Teachers have their personalities, they're individuals, they have their uniqueness. Flight attendants have their personalities, their uniqueness. Chickens actually also have their personalities and their uniqueness. And that's something that I didn't think about for like 21 years of my life or something like that, that this chicken that I had in my hand was actually an individual with a life prior to being dead and prior to being in my hand as I'm eating that chicken. Now, what's something else I used to love? I used to love bacon and eggs. When I came to the United States for the first time, I was staying in friends of my dad's house, and in that house, I loved to have bacon and eggs for breakfast because I was like, it's an American thing, it tastes really good, I love it. But again, what I failed to realize was that behind that piece of bacon that I was eating was an individual. Let me tell you a story. Me personally, I go to a slaughterhouse twice a week in Vernon, California, really close to Los Angeles, and in that slaughterhouse, 7,000 pigs are slaughtered there every single day. And what we're able to do there with me and a group of amazing people who go there every single week, every Monday and every Wednesday, we're able to stop the slaughter trucks that carry the pigs to slaughter, and we're able to meet the pigs for 2 to 3 minutes and give them water, and because this is basically the only time in their lives that these pigs are going to be shown love. If you have any idea how the industries work that use animals and turn them from actual live individuals into food, you will see that they completely exploit them. I mean, these are profit-driven businesses. So for example, in that moment, those pigs who are, by the way, 6 months old, it's the first time that they see sunlight, and when we interact with them, it's the first time that they're going to receive love from someone. So in any case, when we meet them, what is clear as day, black and white, is that these animals are all individuals. In the same way that, say, when we have cats and dogs that we love since we're kids in our Western society, we learn to love dogs and cats. Well, it's very clear that all these animals have their personalities. They're all individuals. They all have their uniqueness. That is something that is clear as day. But all the pigs that come to Farmer John's slaughterhouse to be slaughtered also have their personalities. When we meet them in the trucks, you'll see that, some of them are really curious. Some of them come up to us and meet us. Some of them are very receptive to us. Some of them shy away. Some of them have fear in their eyes. Some of them have sadness in their eyes. Some of them look resigned. Some of them look like they haven't given up on life. They all have their personalities, and this is just something that I never thought about, because again, in the same way that you meet a teacher, if you met a teacher, say at a bar, you would have a very different experience of her than if you met her as your teacher when you're a kid, right? So the context in which you meet someone is going to define, to a certain extent, how you see that person, and might define how you're going to treat that person. When you meet a flight attendant in a plane, you might treat them in a shitty way, especially if you're having a shitty experience on that flight. You might take it out on the flight attendant, which is not justified at all. But if you met that flight attendant, say with me and my friends, I see her in a completely different light. I see her as an individual, and here's the thing, now that I've met her as an actual friend and I love her to death, that allows me to see all flight attendants in a similar way as individuals, and that's going to completely transform the way that I interact with them. Now, similarly, when I meet all these pigs at Farmer John's slaughterhouse and I see them as individuals, it's something that I can't unsee. And in the same way that, before, the only way that I've ever met a pig growing up is by eating bacon and sausages. That's how you meet pigs. Like, I've never met a live pig, just because that's how we use pigs in our society. We use, many animals we use, quite frankly, as human beings. We tend to think that we're the center of the universe and that we're the protagonists of this whole story, and that everything in this world, whether it be the planet or all the animals that inhabit it, exists here for us. We kind of tend to think that. So with pigs, it's like, okay, you are bacon, you are sausage. That's all we know. That's all I learned as a kid growing up. But what I didn't see again is that those pigs are all individuals. And now when I've met them, I see pigs in the exact same way that I learned how to see dogs when I was growing up as individuals that, you know, have emotions, they have their personalities, they have families, they have friends. They would have loved to play with their friends and family. They would have loved to roll around in a meadow and maybe get a belly rub, right? Like all these things I would have never thought about. In the past, it would have just been like, I'm just sitting at home and I'm just eating a piece of bacon, and I'm not thinking that deeply about it. I'm not thinking that, hey, what's up? Like a pig who had all these personality traits that I love about dogs had to be killed for me to eat this piece of bacon and enjoy this meal for 15 minutes. For me to enjoy a meal for 15 minutes, a pig had to suffer for 6 months and be killed against their will. Because think about it, would any animal ever consent to being killed for food or being exploited at all by human beings for our gains? You know, we give nothing to these animals. The whole purpose of their lives is to become food, so we eat them. And by the way, the dairy and egg industries are no different, where they're industries that completely exploit the bodies of animals for us to get what we want. It's all about what we want, right? Either we want milk from them, we want eggs from them, or we just want to eat their bodies. And even the egg-laying hens and the dairy cows, they're also all sent to slaughter in the same slaughterhouses that slaughter chickens that are used for food directly, and cows who are used for food directly. So at the end of the day, they're all killed. And this is something, again, that I have never thought about for 20 years, because for 20 years, in the same way that, you know, to a large degree, the only way that I ever met a teacher in my life was by being a student. The only way that I met a flight attendant was by flying on a plane. The only way that I met farm animals was by eating them and their secretions, which are eggs and dairy. That was the only way that I met them. And so I disregarded the fact that they were all individuals. But one of the most beautiful things that happened in my life personally was that, you know, in the same way that when I met my flight attendant friend, and now, you know, it makes me a better person, because by seeing, for example, in this case, flight attendants as individuals, I'm able to be a better person towards them. I'm able to be a nicer person, a more respectful person, and I'm able to really connect with them as people. You see that? In the same way, now that I've met animals as individuals, not just pigs, but cows, goats, even fish, all these animals that typically, you know, turkeys that we use for food, I have met them as individuals, whether it be in sanctuaries, whether it be in slaughterhouses. I've actually met them, and what I can report to you is that they are all individuals. They all have their uniqueness, they all have their personalities, and they all have, just like you and me, this unique desire to live and this desire to escape pain and to go towards happiness. That is something that we all have, and despite that, we completely exploit that. We completely disregard that. Why? Because as consumers, we like to eat the bodies of these animals, and we like to eat their byproducts. And now, here's the thing. I don't think that when someone is being disrespectful towards, say, a flight attendant, is that person is a bad person. Rather, what I think it is that that person has just been socialized to see flight attendants in a certain way, and they just meet them in a certain context. That being the case, that's how they treat them. It's not that they're a bad person or they would ever wish any harm upon or even disrespect towards that person. It's just the context, and as human beings, we have to understand that we have inherent biases, and sometimes our perspective is very limited. In the same way, I do not believe that the reason we eat animal products, the reason we enjoy KFC and bacon and eggs and cheeseburgers, is because we think it's a great idea to exploit and kill animals. In fact, I believe that most people think that that is a completely just a bad idea. Like, I believe that most people would meet animals, any animal, not just the cats and dogs that we love, but chickens and cows and turkeys and pigs and all the animals, and I don't think that many people would think that a great idea would be to kill these animals so we can eat them. And I just think that it's, since we're just born in a society where everything around us tells us that it's completely normal to eat them, and we're not thinking that deeply about it, because when we meet these animals, we meet them in a very limited context of eating them. And that being the case, I believe that many of us, it's not that we ever consent to this happening, is that we're just taught it's normal. But here's the thing, when I truly realized this, when I truly started seeing all animals as individuals, now it's to the point where I see crickets and I see them as individuals. I see ants and I see them as individuals. We are all earthlings on this earth. We all share this planet. I mean, think about the fact that as human beings, we are just animals as well. We are just one of the species of animals that lives on this planet. That being the case, like I said earlier, it sometimes seems like we're the center of the universe, and we certainly act that way. But does that mean that that's right? Does that mean that that is the best that we can do as people? Not at all. I believe that we are good people. As human beings, I believe that we are inherently good. And in the same way that when I met my flight attendant friend, I now want to be nice to all flight attendants and really see them as individuals. I believe that as human beings, we want to see all animals as individuals. We don't want to see animals being harmed. We don't want to see animals being killed. I mean, think about the sight of an animal being killed for an unnecessary reason, because we do not have to eat animal products in order to survive. We don't need to eat meat. We don't need to eat eggs. We don't need to eat dairy. We don't need these things in our diet to thrive. The science is in. And that being the case, when we are killing these animals, no matter how normalized it has been by society, it is still something that is wrong. It is still something that, we are taking the lives of innocent animals who haven't done anything to us, that if we met them in another context, we would love them. We choose to continue to eat them as a society. And again, I do not believe that this is because we're bad people, but it's just because, again, the context in which we meet them, our limited perspective, and that is just kind of what we're taught to do, right? So, bottom line, what do flight attendants, teachers, and chickens have in common? They are all individuals. And as people, I think that one of the things that I strive to do is I always strive to be a better person, whether it be in my personal life, in my professional life, in all areas of my life. I always try to be a better person. And part of being a better person is being a good person. It's not just achieving what I want to achieve, but it's about creating win-win situations with everyone around me. It's about creating a world where I'm not the only one who wins, but everyone around me wins. People who interact with me win. People that I talk to leave being a better person because I talk to them, right? In the same way, I believe that part of becoming a better person is seeing all earthlings on this earth as an individual, seeing all animals as animals who deserve to have a life, whose life is sacred, so to speak, in the same way that we see human life as sacred. In the same way that, I can't go down the street and kill someone because that person values their life. All animals also value their life in that way. And that being the case, I believe that part of growing as a person is coming to terms with that and acting in a way that is consistent with that. Acting in a way where you see all life as having a worth, all life as deserving of respect, and acting in accordance with that, even though, social pressures and everything in society tells us to do otherwise. Everything in society tells us, eat animal products, eat meat, eat eggs, and eat dairy. Eat this piece of cake, eat this cheeseburger, drink this glass of milk. Everything in society tells us that, but what we have to realize is that behind every cheeseburger and bacon and behind every scrambled eggs that you eat, were animals that had to suffer and die for that product to become possible. And I believe that part of growing as a person is really looking at the world the way that it is, looking behind the curtain of society, so to speak, not just look at things on the surface level, and really go deep and then doing the right thing. Because it's clear as day that when you look at the standard practices of all the industries that use animals for food, those standard practices are cruel. They make animals suffer, and they're inherently exploitation, being it the case that these animals, their purpose in life is to create a product for us, is to create profit for an industry. No attention is paid to the fact that these animals are individuals. In fact, many of the things that happens to all these animals in these industries, if those things were happening to cats and dogs, that would be considered animal cruelty, and the people who would be carrying out those things would be put in jail. But isn't it interesting that now that it's chickens and cows and pigs and turkeys and goats, now all of a sudden it's okay to exploit them in that way? So bottom line, if you listen this far, I really appreciate it. And maybe you start seeing that all animals are individuals. Maybe you start seeing that all people, in fact, are individuals. Every single being on this earth is an individual with a story, and when you meet them, you can connect with them on that basis of being an earthling to earthling. And to me, I really believe that part of us growing as people, as individuals, is really making the connection and seeing that in every single being. And let me tell you that doing that, and for me, choosing to be vegan, because that is the way of life that is consistent with this way of looking at the world, where every animal is an individual, is one of the most beautiful things I did in my life, because now I have a new way of respecting all life forms. I see all animals and I think about my life, and it's not just about me. It's about the world. It's about all the animals that inhabit this world. And it's about me thinking about and living in a way where I contribute to the least harm possible towards other beings. I create the most win-win situation where not only I have a beautiful life, but everyone around me has a beautiful life. All the earthlings that I meet deserve to have a beautiful life, and that's how I think about life. And it's really one of the most beautiful things that I ever did in my entire life. And really, for me, it was part of me growing as a person, and it was part of me becoming who I really was. Because at the core, I believe that we're all good people, and at the core, I always loved animals ever since I was a kid, and I would have never wanted to see animals being harmed. When I was a kid, and I saw even like a man shoving a stick down a fish's throat, and that fish was flailing, and then he put that fish on a fire to grill alive. I thought that was horrible. I still ate that fish back then, but that was not who I was, because I did not want to see that. In fact, I wanted to see that fish be happy and safe. I want to see all animals be happy and safe, and that's really who I am to the core. And that is something that I really believe in. And so for me, choosing to be vegan and living in alignment with who I really am is really one of the most beautiful decisions I ever made. And despite maybe minimal pushback I got personally from people around me, understand like social pressures, and there are a lot of things that tell us to not do that. I really believe that it's the right thing to do, and in life we get to look at the way we get to look at the world, the way that it actually is, not the way that we want it to be, and from there we get to do the right thing. In fact, by doing the right thing, for me, I feel better personally, but I also know that I'm part of a global movement that is on the right side of history. History always moves towards peace, moves towards including more individuals in this circle of respect and compassion. And it's people like you and me taking a stand for what's right that always changes the world. In fact, is the only thing that ever changes the world. If you and I don't stand up for what we believe is right, not just in this area, but in all areas of life, then the world will never change. And it's us making these small decisions when you're at the grocery store. Instead of grabbing the cow's milk, grab the almond milk. Instead of grabbing, say, meat, grab a plant-based alternative, right? Instead of eating eggs, eat avocado toast. All these small choices when you're at a restaurant and you order the veggie burger. Now, maybe the veggie burger is $1 more expensive than the regular burger, but also remember that the regular burger, although you might be paying less, an animal is actually paying for that burger with their entire life. So just think about that for a second. And all these small choices that we make go a huge way in making a difference. And in fact, these are the types of choices that if you make them today, you will make an impact on the world, and you will be on the right side of history, and you will be a beautiful person who really learns to respect all life as life that deserves to have a happy life, just like you and me. So anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. So much love and appreciation for you just for being here. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel. Also follow me on Instagram. That's where a lot of great stuff is going on. If you want to DM me on there, that's the best way to get in touch with me. In any case, thank you again. I hope you have an incredible rest of your day wherever you are. So much love and happiness to you. Take care and peace.